camera shaking. Hello, welcome to Pencils and Stories. Today we're going to talk about how you can make a long comic sustainable for yourself and how you can still have a life next to your comic. I know that a lot of people think that comics is this huge endeavor, and I'm not going to lie, it is a lot of work. But there's definitely ways where you can find some control over either the length of your comic process, or just the amount of time that you want to spend on it, because in the end, it's your decision. If you're making a comic for yourself, if you're making a webcomic, then you have the decision about all of that. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. I want to thank you if you're watching. I want to welcome you to the channel. This channel is all about making your own comics. My name is Henrike and I make and teach comics. And I want to invite you, if you haven't done already so, to subscribe to the channel because I post weekly videos. And I want to direct your attention to a checklist that I made. If you're looking to start your comic, if you're looking to get into comics but you don't have much experience yet, I do have a handy checklist that will take you through the entire process of preparing for your comic and then some of the steps you need to take in order to make your pages. So if you want a free checklist that you can use to have something to hold on to and to kind of like follow, so you can start your own comics, maybe you've been dreaming about that for a while, then go to the link in the description. You can go to pencilsandstories.com/extra, and there you can download the checklist. So with that out of the way, I didn't count them, 5 tips for you. I have 5 tips for you that are all related to your webcomic's length and the amount of time that you spend on your comic. Because first of all, I am very much a proponent of having a life next to your comic and making the whole process sustainable, especially if you make a longer comic, because some of us are making comics that will take years to make. Webcomics, especially when you see these webcomics that post a daily page, or some people even post multiple pages a week, but those are usually long comics as well. They can go into the hundreds of pages. And in order for you to be able to do this for a few years, and even if you do a few short comics, like in the span of like 3 years, you do quite a bit of short comics, that too, like, you want to find that rhythm and you want to find a way to fit comics into your life so that it doesn't take over everything and that you don't have time anymore to enjoy some free time or to do other hobbies or to connect with, your family and your friends and stuff. That's all very important, and that relates to a very important point that I want to make at the end. But let's get that out of the way. I am a firm believer of not spending your entire free time on your comic, especially if it's a longer one. I don't think that's sustainable at all. And also, you need all the other stuff to keep yourself healthy and to keep yourself motivated. If you start skimping on, not seeing your friends, or, not cooking well, or not taking care of yourself in general, your comic will eventually suffer. So I'm always like, have the basics in order, and then the comic is next. Next to all your other obligations and stuff. So one of the things that is very helpful in order, especially if you haven't started your comic yet, but maybe you have started your comic and you're running into this problem where it just takes a lot of time. That was definitely the case for me. Like, I knew comics was a lot of work. I had made comics before, but starting like my long form webcomic, it really was like, wow, it takes a lot of time, and I'm still in the process of making my process faster and, working smarter, not harder necessarily. But that's a skill. That's a skill that you learn by doing and by putting in the time and by putting in the work. That said, if you haven't started your comic yet, you can already figure some of this stuff out in advance. Like, you can set certain rules and guidelines for yourself that make it easier for you to not spend like super long in the week on your comic, or at least like put in 30 hours or something into one comic page every single week, because that's just not doable. You can do that for 1 week or 2 weeks and then it's over. So I would give you the tip of tracking your time for around 2 weeks. I would say 1 week minimum, and then 2 weeks, just to see where your time is going. Because you might think you have more time than you really have. You might even have a little more time actually than you think you do, but for the most part, like we tend to underestimate and overestimate how long certain things take us. So it's really helpful to track your time, and really it's really annoying to do. Like, I did it a while ago. I should maybe do it again because my life has changed quite a bit over the last year. But have a little notebook with you for 2 weeks and just write down where you're spending your time on. It's also really good exercise to see how much time you actually spend on, I don't know, Netflix or, being on Instagram or whatever. And then you can realistically see in what kind of time blocks and what kind of times a day and how long you have for a comic. And you can make the necessary adjustments if you want to. Like, let's say you want to watch 1 hour less of Netflix a week. So you could put that towards your comic again. Also, again, it's really important to track not only your obligations and your appointments and stuff, but also make sure that you calculate in time for yourself. Maybe I am a person who I just need to sit down every once in a while. And by once in a while, I mean daily. I need to sit down and just, relax a bit, journal a bit, doodle a bit, let my mind go everywhere. Like, I'm not a person who can do something all the time. And you might be too. You might want some time just to draw for yourself and not for your comic, like half an hour somewhere, some days, whatever you need in order to stay in a healthy kind of like life for yourself, where you're taking care of your own needs. And that's the thing too. Like, you kind of have to know yourself, know how you work. Some people love to work on their personal projects and their comics in the morning before they go to work, for example. So they get up an hour early, and that means they probably go an hour earlier to bed the day before. And that's when they're really creative, and that's when they really work very well. For me, that's other times in the day. It's usually late in the morning, or it's around 5 o'clock or in the evening. So that's a thing too. And then of course there's weekends where you can maybe have some time for your comic and maybe make some space for yourself. And then with that knowledge of knowing how much time you have a week, you can kind of puzzle together a schedule, an update schedule for your webcomic. And you might also see where your limitations are. Maybe you just simply don't have the time for a 20-hour per page comic right now. And that brings me actually to point number 2, but you might be able to make a comic in a certain style and in a certain way that it takes you way less time to do. That brings me to point number 2, use all the shortcuts. And that sounds really lazy, but what I mean is a comic just is a lot of work. It's not like a single piece of artwork that you just can spend months on and you can put in everything and pour in all your creative ability into this one image. You have a page, and that page has a ton of panels, and then next week you have to make another page. It's like, it's production, basically. So you kind of need a production schedule. That sounds really technical, but in order for you to keep up with the webcomic, you want to have some sort of continuation and a sort of schedule that you can keep up with. And, shortcuts come really handy. And with shortcuts, you can think about shortcuts in your style, shortcuts in the medium you use. Like, for example, you might want to have this really nice idea of doing a comic like in one, like with a brush and ink, like actual dipping your brush into the inks. But if that's not really something that you can do as fast yet, but you work really well with like what are those called again? Those microns, those micron pens, then that might be the smarter option depending on how much time you have in the week. So that's one thing. And then shortcuts, I also mean shortcuts in your programs that you use. If you use digital programs, for example, like Photoshop, you can make certain kinds of actions. You can have swatches for your colors. You can make a tool preset list of like all the tools you use. For example, in my toolbox is not just brushes in mine, but it also has the settings, like the right settings for my lasso tool. It has the kinds of gradients that I use in my coloring. It has my erasers. It has, like, you can put so much in the tool presets in Photoshop. You can make, if you're using things like Procreate, you can make shortcuts under, like if you tap, then you get like a quick menu and you can put things there. And it just really saves you time if you go sit down for an afternoon and work on all of those, just set all of that up in like an afternoon. And that can be super helpful and will save you a lot of time in the long run. The same goes for hotkeys on your keyboard. Learn them. Like it's worth it to learn them. It will save you a lot of mouse clicks and a lot, like that all adds up. And then shortcuts in terms of the drawing and the artwork itself. And the tip I want to give you for this is to study like great comics, because especially like published comics, but you see in webcomics too, like they are on this crazy schedule sometimes, and people just have to be smart with their artwork, smart in the way they portray things. And even like for example, I read a lot of European comics, which is usually like, they call them albums, and they are usually like around 40 pages, and you have like one installment of a story, or it's like one part of many parts. But even in those, like you have authors that are working on that for a year. You have people who work on it way faster, way slower. It really depends on the artist. But there's a lot of them where you can see like they've been doing this for years, and they have this really beautiful way of portraying something in a very, very simple way, but it's super effective. There's this comic that I'm thinking about that the comic was set in the city a lot. So it was a lot of cityscapes. And they had this really great way of losing all the detail when it came to the buildings. Like the further back the buildings went, but even like buildings that didn't matter, which is a point I want to get to later. But buildings that weren't really part of the main composition and weren't really the building that you needed to focus on. Like they had this really beautiful way of still incorporating some detail that made it look like an actual building and not just a square. But it was just really well done. And then the combination with the inking and the coloring was really good on that. It's the same for, there's a comic I have that has like a jungle kind of like thing. It's the same with like trees and stuff in the back, and the way they will just sometimes just use a lot of silhouettes. A lot of comic artists just pay attention to those things, like silhouettes, losing the details, making the edges of things like blend into each other. See where they put the detail in the texture and where they lose it in other places. So that's a tip I want to give you to really study and improve on like shorthands, I guess I could call them, shorthands that you can use in your comic as well, because that all speeds up your process in the end. So the third tip is don't make it perfect. Like I said, a comic is not like a single piece that people read it really fast. Sometimes it's different for illustrated books, or it's different for a painting, especially like a painting. Like you want to have everything really working together really well. You want to do it in a comic, obviously, but you kind of know what I mean. Like you can still have a certain kind of detail and losing detail and stuff in paintings, but it just is a different medium. And comics, they're usually like panels are read very fast, and it is really about the story and the way the story is paced out and the way the story is progressing. So yeah, you want to make, I understand you want to make every panel like super pretty, but also not every panel is created equally. And the tip I want to give you for this is to really, really know which panels on your page need to be like the eye catchers. Sometimes you need to set a scene and you need to draw big backgrounds, but do you need to draw that background in every single panel on this page? Is that really necessary? Because a lot of that stuff often is embellishments. So never lose sight of the fact which panels are important. Like, what do you want to communicate story-wise with a certain panel? Do you actually need a background? Do you actually need all of those details like in the back? Do you actually need to show the character? Like, maybe you can get by with like a camera angle that just goes from, you know, neck up to the head instead of drawing their whole body again, you know? It all depends on the story moments you want to communicate and what is the most effective. You don't necessarily need to draw everything all the time and make everything super pretty. Again, use those shorthands and, you know, make really smart use of just taking the essentials, just taking the essentials of what you need in your panels, taking the essentials of what you need in your communication and leave all the rest out. Make it a sport. Just make it a sport to leave everything out that you don't need in your pages, in your panels, you know, in your compositions even. That is also a skill. That's a thing that comes over time. But when it comes to compositions, camera angles, choosing all of that stuff, always go back to the story. What do I want to communicate? What do I need? What are the elements that I need? Do I need to show emotion? Go for a close-up. Do I want to show relationships between characters? You might actually need a bigger panel that shows the characters in full. You know, those kinds of decisions. Yeah, so don't make it perfect. Don't add things you don't need. I actually talked about that a little bit. But one point I wanted to make about that is not only to just add what the story needs and nothing else, but also really thinking about, especially if you haven't started your comic yet, really thinking about what you love to draw. Because first of all, you might actually have drawn them so many times that you are actually pretty fast at drawing that stuff, but also it will show on the page that you just love drawing all that stuff. So don't add things you don't need. Also applies to, you know, don't start a comic about motorcycles if you really don't like drawing motorcycles. You know what I mean? Because that will slow you down a lot, because you have to look up all the reference and you're not too passionate about the subject, you're not too familiar with the subject, and it will just slow you down. So make use of what you know and what you draw well and what you love to draw, and use all of that stuff. And then this is a very important point I wanted to make, point number 5, and that is think long term. If you want to make a long comic, the way you make it sustainable for yourself is really investing in your health. I am planning on doing a video series on health. I have a very cool idea, actually. It's like, shall I share it? I want to do like 7 videos, 1 video every day for 1 week, and it will all be about health. And I will take you through an entire process that you can implement in order to think about how you are taking care of your body, especially. It's going to be especially about physical health. I'm very big advocate for that, because I have had a lot of problems, you know, things, shoulders, necks, hands, like everything. Like I'm a sign language interpreter and an artist. The combination is sometimes not ideal, but you know, I have also learned in interpreting school, learned a lot about health, and I've learned a lot about, you know, just doing a warm up and posture. Posture is so important, and there are so many artists I see online. I see it all the time, but there was like this big wave again, like a few weeks back, of people who are just injured, and that will hurt your art so much in the long run. So when you're doing this long comic, just make sure you don't injure yourself. Make sure that you don't suddenly have to sit at home for months on end without being able to draw. You know, if you keep not taking care of your body, and I did this for a long time, like if you keep that up, there will be a point when a doctor is going to say to you, you cannot draw right now. You're not allowed to. You need to rest, like your hands or your wrists or whatever. You know, a family member of mine, she actually plays music, and musicians have a lot of the same issues often. And she was just told, like, you cannot use your hands. And she does crafts, she does music. She just couldn't do anything. So she was like, well, I'll just be reading. So that is why I'm such a big advocate for being healthy. Don't work the entire day. Just don't do it. I know that's a controversial thing, especially for people who actually work in entertainment. I see that a lot. People who just say, like, no, you need to make the hours, you know, you need to be drawing all the time. And I actually don't agree with that. Also, because in order to improve, you only have a few hours a day where you can actually really, really deeply work, deeply focus, and actually actively learn. That's another thing. You have like different ways of learning. I mean, just putting in 12 hours a day does not mean that you improve over a person who spend 4 or 5 hours a day. But especially when it comes to webcomics, let's just keep to the topic at hand. When it comes to webcomics, this is a long-term endeavor. So make sure, to invest in knowledge about your posture, in training yourself not to press too hard on your pencil, for example, to look up every once in a while and just, make everything loose again, just stare into the distance because your eyes just are staring at something at the same distance all the time. So that is a very, very good investment in your comic journey in general, and just to make sure that you can draw for the rest of your life, and especially with comics, it's so much drawing. It's so much drawing. It's very important. It's very important. And that is the last tip I want to give you. Like, think long-term and invest in your health. Eat well, drink enough, take care of your body, relax when you're drawing, make sure that you don't have any tension, in places where it doesn't need to be. Make sure that you're as relaxed as possible with a good posture in order to be able to draw. Take breaks, even micro breaks, just a few seconds of doing like this can already really, really help you. Do this every 30 minutes or something, or whenever you're thinking, just make it a habit of just going like this. It's small, but it helps. Yeah, I guess that's it. These are my tips to make your long webcomic journey sustainable. Make sure you're able to do it and able to finish your comic, finish strongly, and keep it up without it taking over your entire life. It is, making those decisions beforehand when you're in the thick of it. Taking all the shortcuts, there's absolutely no shame in that. Taking all the shortcuts every single comic artist does. Don't prettify everything. Don't go into super detail. Be smart with the mediums you use. Be smart with the software that you use. And, don't add all the things you don't need. Focus on your story. Keep focused on what you actually need to communicate, and only that. And then think about your health and work on your health. So I hope that was helpful. If it was helpful, leave it a thumbs up or even a comment. Let me know what you thought. If you have any questions, just put them down in the comments or in the chat right now. I don't see any comments in the chat, but if there are any that you have right now, then please leave them there. Yeah, that was it. I hope it was helpful. If you want more of these kinds of tips, these are things that I talk about in my upcoming course as well. I have an entire process that takes you through the decision-making process of how to make sure that you're making a comic that you want to make in the time that you want to make it, with the resources that you have available, how to determine how long your comic is going to be. That is an entire lesson. Shortcuts. I have an entire thing about shortcuts. I'm very excited about that. It's all about, all the things you can do to speed up the process and stuff. We talk about story a lot. One big way to make sure that you know what you're communicating is to really, really upfront make sure that you know what your story is about, what you want to say with your story, and that just trickles down into every single panel, every single page that you do. So if you want to know more about all of that stuff, I have an upcoming course in January. It's called How to Start a Comic. I'm super excited for it. I'm going to launch it for the early bird people on Kickstarter. It will be a special price for the people who back the Kickstarter. So if you want to be notified the moment the Kickstarter launches, go to howtostartacomic.com. The link is in the description below. You can sign up to be notified. And yeah, I really, really hope that a lot of you will find so much value into the course. Like, I try to pack it with as much knowledge as I could. And I'm super, super excited to bring it to you. So thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day. Make some comics if you can find the time. And I will see you guys next week. Bye.